Hello, horror stories. I'm Amelia. I'm 32 years old and I live in Georgia, United States. I would like to share something that happened to me a few months ago while working with a family. I never believed in paranormal events or strange things, but what happened to me while I was taking care of some girls changed my perspective. At that time, I was taking care of two girls, a 9-year-old and her 4-year-old sister. I have taken care of them since the little one was just a few months old and have never had any problems. We had developed a very close relationship with both the girls and their parents. However, since that night, nothing has been the same again. Their mother asked me to stay a few nights at her house to take care of her daughters, while she and her husband went on an important business trip. The little one's grandmother was sick, so I agreed to go without any problem. The first 2 nights passed quietly with nothing out of the ordinary. I put the girls to bed early and sat on the couch watching TV late into the night. However, it was on the 3rd night that the terror began. She had finished bathing the youngest girl, who always had a lot of energy and could only calm down with a hot bath before going to sleep. Meanwhile, his older sister was watching cartoons on the couch. After 9 at night, they had already gone to bed and were sleeping. They slept in the same room because the youngest girl's room was under repair. When I finally got the youngest to sleep, I went down to the living room to watch a series. Shortly afterward, I heard her favorite doll, who, when squeezing her belly, said, "Come sing with me," and then she laughs out loud. I stopped the series and got up from the couch a little upset, thinking that the little girl had woken up and was playing. I went upstairs and opened the door to their room, but saw that both girls were sound asleep. I checked the floor and the toy chest, but couldn't find the doll. I was a little confused because I was sure I had heard her from upstairs. At that moment, I heard the doll again. The sound came from downstairs. And again she said, "Mom, come, sing with me." And then, her laughter. I felt a shiver run through my body. I walked down the stairs slowly, my heart beating fast. And not arriving in the living room, I searched carefully but could not find the doll. The house was eerily silent, broken only by my agitated breathing. Suddenly the lights flickered and the sound of the doll echoed again, but this time closer, almost beside me. I turned quickly and saw the doll in one of the corners of the couch. I knew it hadn't been there before. Just a few minutes earlier, I had been lying on that same couch watching TV, and the sound was clearly coming from upstairs. I slowly reached over, picked up the doll, and removed the batteries, making sure it couldn't make any more noise. However, at that instant, I felt a cold current run through the whole room, as if it were a gust of wind, and within seconds, the doll repeated again, "Come sing with me." I jumped out of fright and flipped the doll, falling to the floor. I stared at it. I was already in shock at that moment. How could I talk if I had already taken the batteries out of it? I did not understand what was happening. The older girl interrupted my state of shock by calling my name from the middle of the stairs and asking me what was wrong. I told her it was nothing, to go back to bed quietly, and I would go tuck her in. I didn't want to scare her, so I grabbed the batteries from the doll and put them in a drawer in the TV table. Then I went up to her room to check on her. When I entered the room, the little girl sat up in her bed when she saw me. She just watched me, and I told her again to lie down, that everything was fine. She looked at me and said, "Don't fool me, you're scared." I replied that no. I had just fallen asleep on the couch and my phone had rung, startling me. She looked down and said, "He did it again. He scared you." I looked at her in astonishment and asked, Who? What do you mean?" The little girl turned around, somewhat annoyed, facing the wall, and replied, "Don't be afraid. He just wants to play." At that moment, I felt a mixture of confusion and fear. I told her to go to sleep, and I went to my room, which was right next door, tried to sleep, but could not fall asleep all night, terrified by everything I had heard. The next morning, I started hearing whispers in the next room. It was almost 7 a.m. and it was just starting to get light. It was still dark, so I turned on the light on my bedside table, got up and went into the room to see what was going on. When I entered, I found the older girl sitting in a chair next to a game table. When she saw me, I noticed an expression of surprise and concern on her face. She looked at me earnestly and said quietly, "He's here and he's angry." Her words made me feel a knot in my stomach. Trying to remain calm, I asked him, "Who is angry?" She looked at me without saying a word. I told her to go to bed, that it was still too early to be awake playing. Her expression was angry. She folded her arms and remained seated, ignoring me. I asked her who she was talking to, and she replied, "No one." I insisted, saying that I'd heard her talking, and then she replied, "With Daniel. He's here and he's angry because you don't take care of him like you take care of us and you ignore him." I went blank, unable to keep my face from reflecting the terror I felt. I asked her to please go to bed, that I would wake her sister and we would talk later. She interrupted me, saying in a loud and very annoyed tone that Daniel wanted my attention now. The little girl woke up, looked at her sister, and said, "Leave Daniel alone, tell him to go away." I couldn't understand what was going on. That's when I asked the little girl if she knew Daniel too, and she nodded her head. Fortunately, her parents were returning that afternoon and I just wanted to get out of there, scared enough as it was. During lunchtime, the older girl refused to eat, unlike the younger one who ate without a problem and was already looking at the cartoons. The older one started throwing tantrums and playing with the food, which started to annoy me. At that point, she looked at me angrily and said, "Why didn't you put the food on Daniel?" I decided to play along and asked her where Daniel was. The girl pointed to an empty chair next to the table, with a serious expression on her face. "He's sitting there," she said. "He's angry because you didn't put food on him." I felt chills all over my body. Trying to remain calm, I took an extra plate and served him some food. I placed it on the table and said, "Here you go, Daniel. I hope you enjoy your meal." She said, "Thank you," said the older girl, smiling. At that moment, she seemed to relax a little, as if my action had calmed something in the atmosphere. A few hours later, her parents arrived. After making them coffee, the father went to play with the girls in their room. The mother, smiling, asked why there was a plate of food still on the table. I didn't know whether or not to tell her what had happened for fear that she wouldn't believe me, but I knew that being her daughters, as a mother, she would want to know. I lowered my voice and explained what had happened, telling her that there was a boy in the house playing with her daughters and that he wanted my attention. Her eyes widened with surprise. She sighed and murmured, "Daniel?" with a trembling voice. I replied, "Yes, Daniel," at which point I could no longer find any logic to it all. He asked me to tell him everything that had happened. I didn't know where to begin. My hands were shaking and I could barely speak. Seeing me like this, she took me into the living room and we sat on the couch. I told her about the doll that sang at night and how I had found her daughter whispering in her room with the supposed child. She told me that this had been going on for years. They thought it was an imaginary friend, something normal at that age. However, over time, her daughter's insistence on talking about her friend had increased, as had her strange behaviors, leading them to investigate who had lived in the house before. She explained to me that the couple who lived there had a young child who had died in the house. And months later, they decided to sell it. Their son's name was Daniel. But a short time later, they bought the house when their oldest daughter was just a baby. Her oldest daughter told them that Daniel just wanted to play, but that he was sad and lonely. So she had become close friends with him. The mother told me that she had overheard her daughter arguing with literally no one when one of her favorite toys disappeared and, days later, appeared on the chimney on the outside of the house on the upper part. There was no way the child could have put it there. It was then that the mother realized that something was not right, and frightened, they decided to investigate the history of the house. This left them very disturbed. They did not expect to encounter the tragedy of a child in that house. However, they had no choice but to deal with it, as they had a mortgage to pay and the child was not hurting anyone. It was clear that only the older child could communicate with him. The mother admitted that she was terrified for years, but eventually came to terms with it. I was shocked to realize that the child was right. She was communicating with an entity, the soul of a child who was no longer with us. It took me a long time to process it, and I could not get used to the situation. I asked the mother for a few days to reflect on it all and decide if I had the courage to continue caring for them. She nodded and told me to go home quietly and rest. A few months have passed and now I have changed careers. Mother has understood, and of course I visit them often because they have grown up with me and are part of my life. However, I cannot bear the thought of caring for a child who seeks my attention when their soul should be resting in peace. This experience has left a permanent mark on me, trying to understand that there are lost souls from beyond that dwell among us, often unseen. If you have enjoyed this story, we invite you to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any others. Until next time.